Good evening, everyone. It's now 5 p.m. and the June 20th special council meeting will now come to order. Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Patty, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Frank Bankert.
Present.
Councilmember Leslie Notero.
Here.
Councilmember Lloyd Roberts.
Here.
Councilmember Jody Shirley.
Here.
Councilmember Mike Zabel.
Here.
Vice Mayor Glenn Gunn.
Here.
Mayor Dave Gaddis.
Here.
City Manager Lynn Reeves.
Here.
And City Attorney Randy Mora.
Present. Thank you, Patty. We have 4 very important items on the agenda this evening. Let's get started with item 1. This is a proposed voluntary separation agreement for Lynn Reeves. First off, do I have a motion?
Move to accept the proposed separation agreement.
Motion made by Leslie Notaro. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Frank Baker. Leslie, you have the floor.
I've read this over. I was, Randy obviously has written this thing, and I'm assuming that Lynn has reviewed it. And I see nothing. I see it like it covers everything.
And if I may, Member Notaro, just to give you all folks a little bit of a reminder and the genesis of how we got here and how this document came to be. Earlier this month on the, I believe it was the 6th, we had a meeting. During that meeting, there was some discussion of appointing Mr. Riefler as the acting versus interim manager, during which there was extensive discussion. One of the resonant points through that discussion had been that while Manager Reeves had provided for a leave date with terminal leave, and there had been an addendum executed to his employment agreement just before I joined that contemplated him serving as a consultant thereafter. The precise time period was amorphous, and that was creating some confusion on when would Kyle be the manager without any potential switch. Kyle has been the acting manager since the Wednesday after that meeting, but as evidenced by this meeting now, Mr. Reeves is here, he is the manager president. So while the terminal leave approach was generally agreed upon, the resident, I wouldn't say consensus, but there was at least a thematic discussion in the room that we needed definitive dates and definitive approaches. And so as a proactive approach as your town attorney, your city attorney, I drafted this document. Before I drafted it, I conferred with Mr. Reeves to say we have a few options based on how the discussion at this meeting went. Are you interested in exploring any of these? That included whether that would be a voluntary separation agreement, creating a position, an employee position within the org chart, which the manager would have the authority to do, and so long as there were allocated funds, or some other permutation thereof. He was open to this approach and said, he's really just trying to receive the benefit of the bargain that he had made with the city in terms of his compensation, while also agreeing to continue on, and there's a separate agreement that we'll discuss in that regard. After I learned that Ms. Manager Reeves was open to that exploration of a proposal, and that's what you have before you. This is a proposal. This is not a foregone conclusion. You are the council. This has to do with the manager. This is expressly within your authority. I did have a discussion with the mayor the next day after that same hearing, in part because I'm newer to this position, to say what went right, what went wrong, and ways of our dynamic as we learn to work with each other. And because there was an extensive discussion, asked if he was interested in exploring any potential or having me do any work in that regard. He was open to it. And so I prepared this document. This document is based on templates I've used in other communities, not chapter and verse, because you have to, in the law, make everything align with the particular facts. I want to be very clear. There were no backdoor negotiations or additional negotiations. I had circulated this to Manager Reeves last week to say, before I circulate to the council, are you generally amenable to this? So that I don't circulate to them that's something that's a non-starter. Pursuant to section 2-52 of your code of ordinances, the manager is authorized to call a special meeting. And so the mayor is authorized to call a special meeting upon reviewing the proposals we discussed and the ideas for this council to consider. The mayor was comfortable and interested in calling this meeting, and that's how we got here. So there's been no, the mayor was not negotiating with Lynn. There was no, this is for you to consider. This is a proposal. So I want to be very clear about that. I know there's been some concern in this community in the past on the origin or genesis of proposals that the council consider, so I want to address that. That said, what this separation agreement intends to do is to functionally put Manager Reeves in the same position he would have been under the approach that had been discussed with terminal leave going into the end of July. When I asked Manager Reeves to calculate the time he had, he said it would take him through somewhere between July 29 and August 1. July 29 is the final Friday in July, and so at the end of a pay week, and so I calculated everything and working with your financial consultant, Ms. Heather Guadagnoli with Tess and Associates, and provided the numbers. So as far as the compensation goes, when you really want to be looking at Section 2, Sub A is to pay him pursuant to the personnel manual what leave he's entitled to. That would be 100% of any vacation leave accrued, 25% of any sick leave, of which there's roughly 12 days, 11 or 12, and that would turn out to be about 3 days. Items C and D kind of go into the timeline for that payment. Item C goes into the timeline for that payment. The next item on there is item B, as additional consideration, and in particular for granting the employee, Mr. Reeves would get a $3,000 payment. That is not a windfall payment. It serves multiple purposes. In the law, for any agreement or contract to be binding between parties, there has to be what's referred to as consideration. You have an offer and acceptance with something bargained for in exchange. In this case, Manager Reeves is giving the city a complete waiver and release of any claims he may presently have against the city. I'm not representing to you that he intends to litigate or has expressed a desire to litigate. Think of it as insurance and certainty. It's giving certainty through this process. Further, Manager Reeves, I'm sorry, I just keep saying Manager Reeves does not receive his health insurance through the city. He receives a stipend of approximately $600 a month for this. This would allow him to continue in that regard briefly. And also he had planned some other medical appointments for which he is provided, dental, vision, etc. And this would make provision so if there are out-of-pocket costs, it gives him some reasonable expectation to address those as he had planned to do during his terminal leave process. So it is not a windfall payment. It is to put him in a position similar to that which he would be in. The final provision is provision E in that compensation, which contemplates contributions to Mr. Reeves' retirement account, and a $1,000 payment to his 401A and $500 to his 457. Those numbers were based on, had he served through the end of July, as he had fully intended and committed to do, that's the amount of the contribution the city would have otherwise made. So to use common parlance, this is akin to a buyout agreement with an added kicker of an exchange of a release. And that's really all. This puts Mr. Reeves in the same financial position he would have been had he stayed on through July, and the terminal date on this would be this Friday at 5 p.m. And then as a separate agenda item, we'd be discussing who would be appointed as the interim manager as of 5:01 p.m. And at that point, there will be no question who is the manager should something happen. That person would be appointed until such time as you otherwise removed them or appointed someone else. And there would be no acting dynamic, which was another concern that the body had. So that's the genesis of this. I know this was a little long-winded, but given that it was a special meeting called, I wanted to make sure and I hadn't had a chance to speak with each of you, wish to make sure you had a complete understanding, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on how this operates.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. Any questions or comments from the council? Yes, Vice Mayor Gunn.
Just a question, and this scenario is cost neutral to the acting situation? All the numbers that you provide, if we went the acting route where Kyle assumes his duties as acting, which is provided for in his job description, number 12.
Yes, sir.
Or you say, hey, he terminates Friday at 5 p.m., and these are the numbers we compensate him. It's cost neutral?
It is, I can't tell you to the cent that it is cost neutral. It is, I use the term functionally cost neutral. That nominal payment of $3,000 does account for what would probably be, there's a little bit more than that. I couldn't tell you to the dollar and cent, but it is functionally cost neutral, I would say. There's a nominal payment in exchange for the waiver that was specifically contemplated. All other terms beyond that $3,000 payment are cost neutral. Yes, sir.
Because I understand what you're trying to accomplish here. Many people aren't as secure as the ex-military guys are, because the military always has a guy in charge. You always know who's in authority, who has the full weight and authority of the commanding officer. Terminal leave, people are coming and going all the time, so it's not something new to us. So I understand. If everybody's more comfortable going that way, that's fine. But if it's cost neutral, that's my question. So you can have it either way you want.
Thank you, Mr. Gunn. Other council member, Mr. Banker.
Does Mr. Reeves have a contract current with us?
Yes, he does.
When does that expire?
So it doesn't, as written, it doesn't. It is evergreen, and then it has an addendum on it that had him giving a retirement notice with terminal leave, during which time he would continue to accrue benefits as paid here. And the calculus in speaking with Mr. Reeves as the manager was his terminal leave would take him through the end of July. But it does not have absent this agreement, he would cease to be an employee of the city around July 29th, August 1st.
On the evergreen, does the evergreen have a renewal date? Or does it just have,
I don't remember that offhand because it was superseded by the addendum executed
either
in
party
May.
have to give a notice of discharge?
Under the addendum, there is 10 days notice to either party to terminate him as a contractor at $60 an hour. Otherwise, he has voluntarily announced that he intends to separate at the end of July.
Because this is an at-will employment service.
Absolutely.
Okay, so, look, I don't want to take a dime from you, you deserve everything you get, I give you 6,000 instead of 3,000. But what I'm saying is, I'm a guy that does collective bargaining all my life, and God bless you if you get a contract, I'll vote for it.
Any other council members? Let's go to before we go to the citizens, Mr. Reeves, are you satisfied with and willing to accept this agreement?
Yes.
Thank you. Let's go to the citizens for comments. No? Let's go back to the council with Councilmember Notaro having the final word.
I have nothing else to add. Say we vote on it.
All right. In that case, let's take a vote. If the council accepts agreement and waiver, this agreement and waiver, it will be effective on Friday, June the 24th at 5 p.m. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. The motion is approved. Mr. Reeves, thank you for your many years of service. Now let's move on to item number 2, which is appointment of interim manager upon separation of Lynn Reeves. Currently, Kyle Riebler is the acting city manager when city manager Reeves is unavailable. I would like to propose that we appoint Kyle Riebler to become the interim city manager effective June 24th at 5:01 p.m. until a new city manager is hired.
I'll second that.
Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Motion by Frank Banker,
I'll second.
second by Mike Zabel. All right. Mr. Banker, you have the floor.
I believe Kyle is the perfect choice for interim and city managers as expressed in March. Had to contact him yesterday, unfortunately on Father's Day. I appreciate bang, right out there to help the citizens. I don't think we could ask for a better guy.
Other council members? No? Let's take it to the citizens. Would anyone like to speak? All right, let's go back. First, let's go to Mr. Riefler. Would you like to address the council, sir?
Okay.
You okay? All right. Well, let's go back to the council. And Frank Banker, you have the final word.
I think we should go do a vote, Mr. Mayor, on this.
All right, I'm good with that. Because this is a charter appointment, we're going to have to take this in a roll call vote, Patty. So if you don't mind, please take roll.
Councilmember Banker,
Yes.
Councilmember Notaro,
Yes.
Councilmember Roberts,
Yes.
Councilmember Shirley,
Aye.
Councilmember Zabel,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Gunn,
Aye.
Mayor Gaddis.
Aye, so it passes 7-0, and congratulations, Mr. Riebler, and thank you for stepping up to the plate. Now we are on to item 3, which is compensation terms for the appointed interim city manager. Originally, Mr. Reeves proposed compensating Mr. Riefler an additional $2,000 per month. Later, Councilmember Roberts suggested increasing Mr. Riefler's additional compensation to $1,000 per pay period. It was also suggested that this additional compensation would be retroactive from the date of June the 6th, when Mr. Riefler was appointed as the acting city manager. I believe everyone agreed to this, but I'm going to need a motion to continue.
Motion.
Motion made by Frank Banker. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Lloyd Roberts. Mr. Banker, you have the floor.
I believe this is well overdue by, 14 days now. He's been doing the job for since D-Day, and he deserves the compensation. My colleague, Mr. Roberts, wants to do it $1,000 per pay period. I'm fine with that, too.
Thank you, Mr. Banker. Other council members? Vice Mayor Gunn?
What's the difference in pay between the recommended by the current ex-city manager, Lynn Reeves, $2,000 a month, and your recommendation of $1,000 per pay period? What's the
Yeah, it's just a little bit more, and I think from a payroll standpoint, it makes it easier since they get paid every 2 weeks, rather than go through the significant arithmetic.
divided by 2?
Well, it's not by 2 actually, so if you multiply 2,000 times 12 and then divide that by 26, that comes out to be the 2-week pay period.
So what is the difference?
$2,000.
$14.27, I'm not sure exactly what it is.
I think it's 2,000 even.
Annual?
Well, it's 2,000 times 12 if it's monthly.
Right.
And so that would be 24,000. But if you do it bi-weekly, that's 26 weeks. So now you,
So it's
so
basically an extra $1,000.
an extra 2,000.
2,000.
What is Mayor? It's a mute item because we're going to put a new city manager in the next couple weeks anyway. So
Right, that's what I'm saying is theoretically, if
Yeah, I think Mr. Roberts' plan is better. I mean, it's quick, it's easy.
Mr. Mayor, one second, Mr. Roberts.
I just had a question about the retroactive. I mean, I'm for that. Is that not an issue?
It's not an issue, it is permissible, given that he has been fulfilling the role to that date. If you make it retroactive to him assuming the role, then it's commensurate with the services he's provided. It is not a windfall bonus or anything of the sort. It's based on efforts expended in service of the city.
Councilmember Zabel.
Yeah, that was my question, because it appeared at first to be double billing. I mean, we already had a city manager in place, and then we put that in for that file.
I believe the precise date, and I would defer to administration, as this is not my role specifically, but my understanding of the way it functioned was that Mr. Riefler assumed that job on the Wednesday when Mr. Reeves had begun his vacation, so it wasn't to the Monday of the meeting, but the Wednesday of June 8th, immediately following that meeting. So that would not be a double billing. It was the moment Mr. Riefler ascended to the position of acting manager, he would be compensated in conjunction in alignment with the service.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, because, I mean, we're watching our budget here, and just want to make sure that we're not, excessively grinding anybody or any future employee, that type of,
And ultimately, that is the decision of this body as the appropriations.
Yes, sir, Mr. Gunn.
So what was the agreed upon pay range for the new city manager?
yeah, that's,
I don't have that in front of me.
Was there 95 to 100 and something? 85? 185?
85 to 100.
yeah.
I don't know.
That was something I would definitely have on my mind for the next session.
I'll take the
The
word.
reason why I ask is because, well, we try to fill in on that. The estimated range by Lynn Reeves was initially 90 to 115.
I know there were two different. I know Vice Mayor Gunn submitted an email that had 2 numbers, and then I had submitted 2 numbers as well. They were very, very close, but I don't know if we ever made a final decision.
I mean, I remember Lloyd, I think it was 85 to 110 Lloyd submitted, and then that was just what we done with the calculations from the legal city standards.
I guess what Mr. Gunn is asking is, what does that make on a yearly basis? What would that make Mr. Riefler's pay?
I think that's where I'm going is, essentially, we got a new city manager. Where does he fall in that respective pay?
You mean if you take his current salary and add to that $1,000 a week? Because that's effectively what we're
Well,
doing.
what's the bottom line? What do you think he should be making as a new city manager?
Right.
If you brought him on,
What's his current
I mean, I think it's a fair question,
Yeah.
rather than just throw a number on it.
But what we're talking about right now is just for the interim status.
Well, this interim status would move him to $96,000 a year. But we kept him the one with the $1,000. What he's currently making now, $26,000, we'll make it $96,000.
Okay.
So it would be within the ballpark.
Well, yeah, it's 94.05 is what I see based on your increase per pay period.
Okay. What is he making now?
That's 63, and 26,
Now we make 68.5. Plus,
60.
plus, that's based on his auto compensation too.
We're not extending this out for a year. This is just for the period while it's in.
Mr. Gunn, what was it based on extra?
Well, he has an annual salary plus a monthly car allowance.
Well, you can't include the monthly car allowance in the salary. Yeah, that's a separate.
Okay, let's get this conversation under control.
Go back to
Are you finished? Okay.
I-
Any other council members have comments, and then I'll come back to you, okay? No? No? Okay.
Well, you can't, I mean, he uses his car for, I mean, this man used his truck for all over the city, so, I mean, I'm sure he's using his car or his truck or whatever all over the city, so you can't lock that into his salary.
I have no problem with someone making an amendment to this motion, but as it stands right now, the motion is for, it's $1,000 per pay period.
And why don't we stick with that when we find our new city manager, we discuss the whole.
Okay, I had a question on the effective date. For some reason, I was under the assumption that the effective date was that day that we voted to make him the acting city manager, whether he was actually filling in or not. Otherwise, it would be flipping a switch off and on. Did I read that incorrectly?
The way that the approved motion at that meeting was structured was that Mr. Riefler would be the acting city manager upon the unavailability or declared unavailability of Mr. Reeves, the absence of Mr. Reeves from the jurisdiction or declared unavailability. Mr. Reeves on that Monday had communicated that on Wednesday he intended to travel outside of the region, beginning his period of absentia, and he would return for this meeting, but or the budget meeting, not the special meetings, that was not contemplated at the time. But the idea on the floor, to avoid any confusion during the course of the meeting on who would be sitting to my immediate left, as it were, was that upon Manager Reeves' departure and declared availability thereafter, which had been declared to be Wednesday, the 8th.
Okay, so during the time that Mr. Reeves is now back and is the city manager on site, is Mr. Riefler actually eligible for this pay, or is he ineligible?
You could prorate it that way. You could make the determination that he is still providing. It's within this body's determination, ultimately, how you're going to allocate these funds. And this was part of why I had suggested that these matters be bifurcated between first appointing and two allocating, and also why it was not handled that night, to the extent there's been any question on why did we do it that night. I'd hoped in that time that there had been some reflection or thought on that, but that is precisely, and this is also why we were seeking, why the separation agreement was contemplated, is because you do have situations, even if they're sparing, where Mr. Reeves is here as the manager, as in this moment. So ultimately, it's this body's determination how it wishes to allocate any wage increase, if any, to Mr. Reeves.
So I am open to the 6th was the Monday where that was Tuesday. The following day was the day that Mr. Reeves left town, and so that would be the 7th. I'm fine with the 6th or the 7th. It's entirely up to this council. If someone wants to amend the motion to make it the 7th, I'm okay with that. If not, then I propose that we move forward.
Just one clarification in my own head. So it was $1,000 every 2 weeks, correct?
Correct. Any other comments from the council before I go to the citizens? No? Citizens, any comments? No? Back to the council with Mr. Baker, you have the last word.
I believe we should keep, oh, I'm sorry.
So this is compensation for the appointed interim manager, which we just appointed.
Yes,
But now we're back.
because we wanted to give him compensation on the beginning June the 6th, but then we realized that there was a conflict where you couldn't have two city managers. The following day, Mr. Reeves went out of town, took a vacation, and the only alternative was to have an appointed acting city manager. And the council, I believe the council agreed that there was no difference. It was just that we had to have someone here standing guard.
So my point is, in his job description, his job description says he is acting city manager in the absence of the city manager.
Correct.
So he was just doing his job as community services and assistant city manager.
Yes.
So you could compensate for that.
Mike, can I ask a question? So are we retroactive giving the $1,000 per pay period effective June 7th? Is that?
Right now, the motion is for beginning June the 6th, or actually, I guess that would be end of day June the 6th. Does that make? Mr. Moore, can you help us out, please?
The motion on the floor presently stands at June the 6th, $1,000 per pay period. And that is the motion on the floor. If a member of this body wishes to change that motion, that may be done. If the member who initially moved wishes to withdraw their motion, that is also an option procedurally. They can a motion can be proposed to amend it, in which case the motion maker would have to accept the amendment as friendly. If they don't, the initial motion maker can withdraw, or alternatively the motion would stand or fail on its own merit.
I think to expedite this, the correct way to do this would be the start date of June the 7th, because we voted on June the 6th, and he actually didn't do anything until the following day. So I need someone to make a motion to amend, if you agree with that.
Mr. Mayor, why nickel and dime the guy out of a day's pay? I mean, this is like a Seinfeld episode. More work, more responsibility, not much more money. I mean, I think he deserves any compensation from June 6th.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, sir.
I don't believe it is nickel and dime him. He did at the start. I mean, this whole situation is very driven by start dates, actual duties. He was not until the following morning, because we were meeting at night. The actual start of pay left most jobs.
For clarity in the record, just because the way the discussion is going, and my apologies for interrupting the council members, it was not my inclination to do that. Manager Reeves left the jurisdiction on the 8th. On the 7th, Manager Reeves was here for the full day. The 8th was the first full day. In the event that is informing your decision making, Wednesday the 8th is the first full day during which Mr. Reeves was in that position. Member Bankard made the motion for the $1,000 per pay period beginning the Monday. Member Bankard has, I believe, communicated no desire to withdraw the motion. I believe, was it Member Zabel who had seconded? Member Zabel had seconded. If Member Zabel withdraws his support, the motion would need a second. Otherwise, a proposed amendment can be considered, and these are the Those are the procedural approaches to if the body desires to change its current course.
Well, just,
My apologies, I'll retain my support.
no, just for the record, Mr. Reefler's been attending workshops, council meetings before his termination or whatever. So he's been doing all the responsibilities. He wasn't doing them a year ago. Only on special meetings he would attend. So again, you're nickel and diming this guy, okay? He's taken on the responsibility. As the mayor said, and I agree with you 1,000%, thank you for stepping up. So what are you going to do? Scorch him for a day or two?
Thank you, Mr. Banker. I'd like to hear from other council members before we take this to the public. Mr. Roberts.
If I recall, my memory's not always great. I think we decided on the 6th only because that was a Monday, and it was the first day of the pay period. So my only question to you, Andy, is that a problem that we have an overlap of that $100 per day, even though the city manager is here? I mean, is that a problem? Can we just say,
I've not done the analysis on whether those $200 would present a tremendous legal issue for this community. I will tell you that were it to become an issue, the remuneration could be sought from the employee. Separately, I'm trying to remember where the other part of that was, your recollection, I want to clarify the record. The motion that was approved ultimately was that Assistant Manager Riefler would become the acting city manager effective upon Mr. Reeves' absence from the jurisdiction or declared unavailability, which the understanding at the time was, and the facts revealed themselves to be, would begin on Wednesday, the 8th. There was no change of the guard or authority until Wednesday, if that informs your decision.
So now the motion stands at June the 6th. You're more than welcome to make a motion to amend to the 7th or the 8th, or we can cancel this motion out and start over with a brand new motion.
And by cancel it out, Mayor, I would say that it would need to, absent withdrawal or amendment, it would need to be voted on and stand or fail until we...
Either way, we're taking another vote before we actually get
If
to
the motion
the
fails.
end game, correct.
I would move to amend the motion to make it effective June 8th.
Member Notaro is proposing an amendment to the standing motion. The main motion on the floor was made by Member Banker. Member Banker, are you amenable to the proposed amendment?
No.
The motion maker is not amenable to the amendment being made. Mayor, procedurally, it would proceed on its own. The motion would proceed on its independent merit. So there's no amendment.
No way to amend this.
Absent approval of the individual motion maker from a rules of procedure standpoint, that is how that is ordinarily handled, Mr. Mayor.
Interesting.
Yeah, we're not accustomed to that.
We've amended motions before.
And I'm not saying you can't, and ultimately, if this body...
Is it because it's not been seconded, or is it just because I don't think we've had a second on this motion yet?
I think from my experience, though, it does have to be approved by the person who made the original motion.
That is
Under Robert's.
Under Robert's rules, that's how it functions. I'm trying to pull up your rules of procedures. They were sent to me. Candidly, I did not anticipate needing to be fluent in this particular aspect of it.
It's quite all right. Historically, that's what we've done in the past. We had a motion made, then we had a second, then it went up for debate, and if it was determined that someone on the council did not like the motion, they could propose to amend it and make a motion to do that. We would vote on that motion, and if it was approved, then now that became the motion to vote on.
The word amend is used twice in your code as it relates to your rules of procedure and rules of debate. Section 2-62, Rules of Debate, Sub I, a motion made by a member of the City Council shall be germane to the item before the City Council for discussion or debate, which has happened. Amendments to a main motion shall be voted upon in reverse order of being made. Only one main motion shall be moved and placed before the City Council at any given time. Amendments to a main motion shall be voted upon in reverse order of being made. There's no reference by these rules to the amendment being received as hostile or amenable. By that end, I would say that the motion would be voted on independently as you've done in the past.
Okay, thank you very much.
My apologies for the confusion.
No worries. I understand other communities do it differently, and we sort of loosely follow Robert's rules. So we have a motion on the table right now made by Councilmember Notaro to amend this motion to a start date of June the 8th, 2022. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Lloyd Roberts. Councilmember Notaro, you have the floor.
I think we've talked about it. That was the day that Lynn left town and Kyle officially became effectively the interim city.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other council members that would like it? Yes, go ahead.
I have no problem with the pay structure, what you're proposing. It seems to me to be cleaner. Up until you just voted him in as interim city manager, he was acting. That's in his job description, his current job description. So if you clean this up and say, hey, he was acting, he was doing his job, we just voted him in as interim city manager, start the clock. Makes it clear. So you're going to get some resistance and pushback from me. I got no problem with the pay. It's just, I see he's doing his job, acting city manager, and that's how you clean it up. Now he's interim manager, start the clock.
Okay, so do we have a second right now? We do, Lloyd Roberts. Okay, so now we need to, is there anyone else that would like to make a comment on this before I go to the citizens?
Well, in his job description, I don't have it in front of me, but I'm sure at the bottom, like most job descriptions says, and in all necessary functions required. Okay, so you can tell him to sweep the floor too. But he's been doing the job, okay? Lynn's been taking a lot of vacation. He deserves it. And I think he just nickel and dime him. I don't think we're showing the respect he deserves. Why not?
Thank you very much. Do we have any citizens that would like to comment on this? No? All right, back to the council with Leslie Notaro.
No further comments.
All right, let's take a vote on amending the original motion to where the start date is June the 8th, 2022. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, now that we've got that out.
Opposed?
Sorry?
All opposed, just so there's
They're
clarity.
all opposed.
I'm opposed.
You are opposed. All right. Noted. Frank Bankert opposes. All right, now we move on to the original, well, now the amended motion, and that is to, let's get back here so that I'll say this correctly. Let's see here. Now we are, Councilmember Roberts suggested increasing Mr. Riefler's additional compensation $1,000 per pay period, and now it's retroactive from the date beginning June the 8th. And if all is good with that, we're back to the council again for comments, and then we'll go to the citizens. Nope. Citizens? Nope. All right, back to the council. Oh, all right, let's take a vote on this one, and we are going to have to, we don't have to do a roll call vote on this one, so all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Hey,
Lynn Gunn opposes. All right, so it passes 6-1. Congratulations, Mr. Riefler. Now we are up to item 4, which is the proposed continuing contractual relationship with Lynn Reeves. First off, do I have a motion?
I would move to approve the continuing agreement for professional municipal executive services.
Leslie Nataro, do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Lloyd Roberts. Ms. Nataro, you have the floor.
I think we've talked about this before, and I think it makes perfect sense to keep Lynn on a contractual basis based on his experience and knowledge of what's going on in the city. Anyone know he has one?
Any other council members? Yes, Vice Mayor Gunn.
Who has oversight of this? In other words, who's the point of contact for consulting?
Manager.
City Manager.
It's spelled out in the terms of the agreement. It's the
So he
manager.
keeps a log of expenses and times and all that?
If I may, Member Gunn, and I'm sorry, I'm also adjusting to how you folks do business. As far as from a staffing point to give the necessary context, on May 2nd, 2022, the city agreed to an addendum to the employment contract that reads in full, the City of Bel Air Beach desires to continue the services of Lynn D. Reeves in a consulting capacity after the effective date of his resignation and completion of terminal leave as city manager. During terminal leave, the city will reimburse the cost of actual travel expenses. The parties desire to compensate Lynn D. Reeves in the following manner: $60 per hour plus the cost of any actual travel expenses. That was all of it. And so what this agreement seeks to do is delineate exactly those kinds of concerns. The scope of services here contemplates that Mr. Reeves will facilitate the adoption of the city's budget, facilitate transition of leadership to his successor as city manager, provide insight on previous management decisions, analysis and goals, and provide such other insight, advice, and skills as may be required by any person occupying the office of acting interim or contracted city manager for the term of the agreement. The agreement has a one-year term. Payment is again at the $60 per hour, but it specifically contemplates that on the first of each month or as soon thereafter as practical, Reeves will submit to the city manager an invoice itemizing his time spent, tasks performed, and any correlating charges or expenses for performance in service of the agreement. If that manager disputes the charge, they will submit it in writing to any of those charges, submit them in writing to Mr. Reeves to resolve, just as you would if you said, hey, Randy, it says here you billed for this, and oh, that's the wrong city, my mistake, I'll fix that entry. And so those sorts of things I did before, in the drafting process, I conferred with Mr. Reeves and asked him if he's amenable and aware of how that obligation would work. He said he's prepared to do that. And so that would not create an unnecessary or undue administrative burden. Everything after the third paragraph is the agreement term, which is 1 year, unless sooner terminated by either party. Thereafter, it can only be renewed by written agreement of the parties. And everything after that is really what most people tend to call legalese, the boilerplate necessary contents that will protect both parties involved and also memorialize terms required by statute with contractors like the Public Records Commission. So that's how this operates.
So the interim is a gatekeeper.
The interim, the acting, the whomever shall serve as Highlander. Whoever is your city manager is the gatekeeper of this process. And it is contemplated to be a, as they use in the medical profession, PRN, or on an as-needed basis. If there's not a need for Lynn's insight, then Lynn will enjoy the comfort of his family and his time, but if that insight is needed and Lynn's available, he'll provide it. He is an independent contractor, not an employee in this arrangement, and so that's how that would be.
And I believe it's perfectly acceptable for this council to ask for a monthly report of expenses generated by Mr. Reeves and whoever the city manager is at the time. Looks like a reasonable contract to me, and it leaves travel in there with reservations, so he's not taking a limousine from there, here and back. And so I think this is a good agreement, and I believe that we'll also benefit from utilizing Mr. Reeves' knowledge, extensive knowledge of this city and its history. Do we have any other council members that would like to make a comment?
I'm sorry. Two parts is, one, are we protected from any future claims against the city in this contract?
There is not an indemnification provision, if that's specifically what you're asking. I did contemplate that provision, given that Mr. Reeves would be an independent contractor functionally in retirement. If this body wishes to negotiate that, I thought that would likely be a non-starter given the parties' disparate positions. You do have your whatever insurance coverage would ordinarily operate for any contractor, just as myself or anybody else operating in service of the city. You're also afforded, of course, all the protections as a sovereign under your liability statutes. But no, this does not create any added duty or a burden of liability upon Mr. Reeves or insulation to the city.
I just want to make sure, because in the event of travel, obviously, things can happen, accidents, therefore, I just want to make sure that we're indemnified from that.
There is not an indemnity provision in this.
The second one was, is there a minimum charge for him to come out? We have travel included. You just can't bring somebody out of bed for a half-hour piece of work. Usually, in some service contracts, there's a set minimum. You know, if we call him up, there must be 4 hours charged, for example. Is there anything in this contract such as that?
There is not a set minimum in this contract, and that is in part to defer to the discretion of whomever is your manager in that regard, and also in recognition of the modern working landscape. I believe that travel would be the exception and not the rule. Mr. Reeves would be available via phone or any other telecommunication platform, and travel would be were it absolutely necessary or there were real, and perhaps I'm presuming too much to say so, but since we're dealing in taxpayer dollars, that would not be used for frivolity. Is like, hey, I just wanted to check and see how things are doing and if this filing cabinet looks okay. But more, there is real value added to Mr. Reeves' physical presence.
Okay, so there's no additional charge in the city for, and it sounds trivial at times, but phones, setting up telecommunications, network contract just for the purposes of being a manager assistant.
Because this wasn't, I will tell you, this was not, just as the last agreement, this was not the product of some extensive negotiation or workshopping process. This was put to you as a proposal. I was navigating the tension between over-lawyering the document from what had been half paragraph to try and add those protections to try and capture the essence of that agreement. So the way it reads now is the city further, beyond the $60 per hour, city further agrees to compensate Reeves for any reasonable travel expenses directly related to or resulting from this agreement. So the only remunerations are the $60 an hour and travel. There is no provision in here to reimburse a portion of his cell phone bill, the electricity in his home, or any other potential de minimis charge that is associated with this. And if there is an effort to do that, that would be a charge that would likely be submitted, disputed, and resolved in a manner that would be reasonable to the parties. That reasonable qualification did not exist, or directly related to did not exist in the prior draft.
So there is something that I'm still questioning here, and you brought this to light actually, this conversation has, is how do we control billing? So a 5-minute phone call, is that an hour? Is that 5 minutes to be contributing towards an hour? This is the one thing that I think is missing, is because effectively Kyle can call him 3 times in a day, and if every phone call is an hour, now we're into some big bucks.
So understanding that, if you wish to amend this, my understanding that terminology doesn't exist in here. To the extent I discussed it at all with Member Reeves or Mr. Reeves, I had explained it that it would be just akin to how I bill, right? I bill in minimum certain increments. So if you wish to say in minimum 10 minutes, 15-minute, whatever interval, we can amend the agreement accordingly. Again, this is a proposal for your body, for this body to consider. If you wish to make provision for a minimum increment, that can be added to this agreement. Provided Mr. Reeves doesn't object to the term, the parties agree on that term, then you're allowed to, as parties, define the terms of your agreement.
I would be okay with 15-minute increments. Is that pretty standard for what you do?
For what I do?
Yes.
The law tends to do 6-minute increments. It's that because it evenly divides an hour in tenths, and every 6 minutes is a 0.1. So when you get an attorney who reads your email and it takes them 7 minutes, it's a 0.2. Whether it's 7 or 11, it's a 0.2. In most, your prior attorney didn't bill in those increments. Mr. I want to say Fred, I can't remember his last name now, but
Riley.
Yeah, Mr. Riley did not bill in those increments. So I would say that it varies, by party and by contractor across industries. 15 minutes is not unreasonable. It divides an hour evenly in 4 increments.
Well, what would the council like to do?
Can we go ahead and approve this with stipulation that the increments are billable by 15 minutes?
If you make a motion to that effect and it's approved by the body, I would suggest you make sure that you see if Mr. Reeves has any input on the matter, but yes, you can. Manager Reeves has said he's fine. A voice not quite as obnoxious as mine.
Is that a motion?
That is a
to
motion
amend
to
the
amend.
contract to where it's 15-minute increments.
Correct, that's a motion to amend, that we bill in 15-minute increments.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Glenn Gunn. You've made your comments. Would you like to say anything else?
No, sir.
Okay, any other council members on the 15-minute amendment? Back to the citizens. Yes, sir.
Comment is presently on the pending amendment.
John Hansick, 22nd Street. The monthly report, I'm listening to what all got to be done, the monthly financial for the consulting.
Let me interrupt you. Right now, we're debating on adding the 15 minutes. So whenever we get back to the main motion,
I'm sorry.
you're welcome to make comments. Anyone else? All right, back to the council. All right, let's take a voice vote on amending the contract to 15-minute increments. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, great. So now we are back to the main motion with the main amended motion for this contract with a 15-minute amendment onto the contract. Do we have any more council comments before we take it to the citizens?
This is an entire agreement. There's no workers' comp included in this. He's a total, sole independent contractor.
Correct.
Except for the 15 minutes that we just approved, that's it.
That would be the only change to the agreement you have before you. He is an independent contractor. How an independent contractor could make that claim is a separate thing.
I'm just saying, if he's hurt, traveling, God forbid,
I can't give you blanket statements based on how things operate in the law.
Let's take this to the citizens right quick. Mr. Hansick, would you like to make a comment?
I need to ask a question.
John Hansick, 22nd Street. In this monthly financial report that's going to be required for these consultations and financials, are you going to require receipts for authorized travel when needed to be here to do business? I hadn't heard that in any of the conversation. I just wanted to know.
It's a general requirement in the law in terms of if you're going to provide remuneration, you're agreeing to compensate Reeves for any reasonable travel expenses directly related to. There would have to be some proof of that. The report itself, members, would also be a public record, as with those receipts.
I would expect the same. Thank you very much, Mr. Hansick.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the citizens? No? Yes. All right, back to the council. Anyone have a comment they'd like to make? Nope. If that's the case, let's take it to a final vote to approve this contract. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, so the contract passes, and that being said, I think it's time to conclude this special council meeting because we have 6 minutes to prepare for the next one. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Before we move to adjourn, I do have one piece of business I do very, very quickly want to address with you, just because of how the law operates on a particular issue. The city received correspondence about a month ago from a party disputing the validity of the city's ordinance requiring the registration for short-term rentals of condominium units. I've reviewed it with Mr. Riefler, Mr. Reeves, and I have a draft response that will go out tomorrow. It's been sent to each of you. It was sent about 2 hours before this meeting, as that was the timeline in which it was completed. I'm happy to discuss it with each of you individually, but I needed to make it clear in a public meeting that that was pending. And I will contact you each individually afterwards.
Thank you very much.
I had a comment.
Yes, sir.
Sorry to pause. I've got a sensitivity to the protocol of how this was done. I think that the protocol is you have a work session, discussion, debate, provide guidance to what you want, direction, instead of something coming forth with a special meeting, throw it down, it's done, here are the numbers, let's take a quick vote on this. There's a sensitivity to perceived pressure on it. Hey, let's just get this done. It's one of those things that you need to make haste slowly on because it's a binding decision that, hey, we're responsible for the residents' pocketbook on this thing and doing the right thing. I'm sensitive to it because of the last couple of years, how things were done, and things were done in the shadows or whatever, and then all of a sudden, something was thrown down in front of us, and I didn't like doing business like that. This body is here because business is done in the sunlight here. We discuss it, we debate it, and then we provide direction and guidance on how we're going to do this thing. There was no backup material in the website for this stuff, so we abrogated some of our duties for getting this information out to the residents. So it's a slippery slope, and I'm concerned about it, and just consider that for future actions. That's all I have.
Thank you very much. I too was aware that there was an issue. Unfortunately, the agenda went out a day early, and then the supplemental information followed, and that was sent by the city attorney, and it was improper, and I meant to bring something up about it, but the agenda was published, so you can't amend the agenda after the fact. And that was the mistake, was we were under the wire to get the special meeting in on top of the existing meeting. And timing being the essence, we have a city manager who is in and out, and he's ready to go. So
I'm not going to buy the time is of the essence because this meeting goes back to several weeks. We could have had a work session in between, and just like other things we've done lately, it's just thrown down in front of us, and I don't like the competition.
I actually didn't feel that way because we had everything in front of us as far as the contracts. We've had them long enough to read through them and decipher them and ask the city attorney questions. And as far as the Mr. Riffler being moved over and getting a pay increase, we all knew it was coming. Again, we need to adjourn this meeting. And do I have a motion?
Here I have a motion.
Frank Baker, and who made a second?
I'll second.
Leslie Nataro. All in favor to end this meeting?
Aye.
Aye.